All right, we're going to continue our conversation on creative revolutionaries. This is part 2. This is, as you know, a chapter in the book Adland by Mark Tungate, and this is available via the GE Library as an ebook, so I hope that you will read this as we're going along. We're going to talk about a fellow named Jerry Della Femina now, which is going to be, I think, fun. You can see the book that he wrote, which was called From Those Wonderful Folks Who Gave You Pearl Harbor. And this came from the fact that he worked on an advertising campaign for a Japanese electronics firm. I believe this was in maybe in the 60s, if not the 70s. And they used that line, from those wonderful folks who brought you Pearl Harbor. Of course, Japan bombed Pearl Harbor in 1941. Well, today I'm sure this would be considered politically incorrect, insensitive, but it was successful at the time. It certainly was bold and brash, and that was the nature of advertising at that time. So, as we were talking about before, especially the humor. So here's Jerry Della Femina from a few years ago.
Okay, well, the AMC drama Mad Men won its second Emmy for Best Drama this week. It's set at an ad agency in the early 1960s, a time of great change for the industry that some say is being repeated today. Well, Jerry Della Femina was working on Madison Avenue in the Mad Men days and is currently the CEO and Executive Creative Director at Della Femina, Rothschild, Giri and Partners. And he joins you now, a legend really in the advertising industry. Jerry, an honor to have you with us.
Good to be here.
And you say that Mad Men is tame compared to what you experienced in the 60s.
Oh, yes. First of all, they have it set at the wrong time. The Mad Men era was really the 50s. The 60s was really the creative revolution. But it's so much milder than the business really was.
And is it? Are we coming full circle again? I mean, in terms of just the change in the ad agency business.
The business has evolved. It is now the business of the bean counters. It's a business of people who are checking. When I started in advertising, in that Mad Men era, I was in a mailroom. They had 27 kids in the mailroom. Now, if you find one mail boy in any agency, you're lucky to find
or
him.
Anywhere, really, yeah.
Anywhere.
You know, it's hard because
okay. So in that sense, when you say that it's the bean counters have taken over.
So I'll pause it there. So he again is saying that we've sort of gotten away from the creative aspect that we've been talking about. That was common, and that was the rule in the 1960s. Della Femina was especially known for this ad. You may have heard of this or seen it, and I think it somehow will be familiar to you.
Meow 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 meow
Meow Mix comes in 2 varieties, original and seafood middles.
So I'll pause that there, but the famous campaign for Meow Mix, which obviously, again, has a lot of humor to it. It could easily drive you crazy, I suppose, and a lot of people probably hated it for that reason, but everybody knows Meow Mix. And it's impossible not to remember that commercial. So, again, a lot of creativity and imagination there. Mary Wells started with Doyle Dane Bernbach, whom we were talking about in the last outline and video, and as the co-founder of a company called Wells Rich Green. She was known for TV advertising as spectacle, and we'll see some examples of that here in a few minutes. She is very closely connected to Dallas, and we'll have some examples of how that is so here in a moment. But here's a moment or two with Mary Wells, one of the first women to make a major impact at the very top of the advertising industry.
My mother was very quiet. My father was out of sight. Well, he'd been an ambulance driver, and he came back from the war clinically depressed. So most of the time I spent with him growing up, he would hide. At dinner, when we would eat, there was just never a word, Nobody ever talked to me about anything. And I think people who are loners or who have lives that they have to kind of overcome when they're young, I think that they get a strength that's very useful later on. Everybody thought I was going to be an actress. It was just considered inevitable. And my mother, in an effort to try to get me out of Poland, Ohio, pushed me into the theater because they couldn't afford to give me tap dancing lessons or singing lessons or anything like that. And my whole life changed because it became about the theater. And from the first moment that I got a job in advertising, which was in a department store, that whole theater experience that I'd been having all those years just all came and worked for me. Moving to Doyle Dane proved to me that I'd been right from the start, that it was the most exciting business you could possibly be in, and it was the right place for me. But it was print. Even on television, it was print. It was moving print. I wanted to turn it into the theater.
Isn't that wonderful?
So I left Doyle Dane Bernbach and went to Jack Tinker and Partners and sort of ran that for a period of time. And while I was there, I tried to get my clients to do big things, that were very dramatic.
Anybody who's a terrific ad person, from the creative side anyway, usually has those two qualities. They're salesmen and they're entertainers.
I'm going to pause that there. In this video, they will get to something that I am going to tell you about here in a moment. We'll see some examples of the work that Mary Wells did with Braniff, for which she is very well known, and Braniff has that Dallas connection we were talking about. She persuaded clients to change their marketing strategy to go with her advertising campaign. So they're putting the advertising really ahead of the standard operating procedure for the company. So perhaps to actually change the way the company did business to allow for a very bold advertising campaign. At this time, jet planes were always metallic or white in color. Terminals, airline terminals, the airports themselves were not a happy place to be, and some people may still feel that way somewhat today. Gray and soulless were the words used at that time. I think they're probably a little bit more fun to be in today. And here was an ad for Braniff, and Braniff was based in Dallas, the end of the plane. So Braniff went with different colors for its planes. Braniff went out of business sometime, I think, in the 80s, but this was a very successful campaign for Braniff in the 60s, and so they had red and blue and orange and yellow and green planes, and so the plane stood out from the aircraft of other airlines. And then she had an Italian fashion designer to design the hostesses' uniforms, which could be partially shed. They could, they could take parts of them off. Obviously, that was not as provocative as it might sound, although they did. Mary Wells did play on that with something they called the Braniff strip, and this was a television commercial that was created by Mary Wells, based on the uniforms of the Braniff hostesses.
When a Braniff International hostess meets you on the airplane, she'll be dressed like this. When she brings you your dinner, she'll be dressed this way. after dinner on those long flights, she'll slip into something a little more comfortable. The Airstrip is brought to you by Braniff International, who believes that even an airline hostess should look like a girl.
So again, this is for our own time decidedly not politically correct, but it was successful at the time in the 60s, and was created by one of the first women to be very powerful and successful at the very top of the advertising industry, Mary Wells, and Braniff stood out from other airlines because of the color of the planes, the way the planes themselves looked, and then the way the hostesses, or of course at that time they were often called stewardesses, the way they dressed. Mary Wells also famous for Alka-Seltzer. Came up with a very catchy little tune, and a very imaginative way of conveying the idea that Alka-Seltzer is good for everyone, no matter who they were and what kind of shape they were in and what kind of work they did, and so on.
No matter what shape your stomach's in. No matter what shape your stomach's in, when it gets out of shape, take Alka-Seltzer. Alka-Seltzer relieves the flutters, calms the nervous feeling, relieves heartburn, relieves the stuffy feeling, and relieves the headache. Fact is, today, in 1966, nothing works better than good old Alka-Seltzer. Nothing.
So very successful campaign there for Alka-Seltzer. And again, we're seeing all this, some terrific creativity and imagination, very memorable advertising. That little tune actually became a hit record, which I will not go to the trouble of playing for you, but became one of the really familiar instrumental tunes of the 60s. Mary Wells, and by the way, there was a Motown performer by the name of Mary Wells. This is not the same Mary Wells, but she also did the I Love New York campaign in the 1970s. New York was going through a very bad time. People were afraid to go to New York because of the crime and so on, and she created this campaign promoting New York called I Love New York, and we still today, do we not, see that heart symbol to symbolize the word love? Well, she created that in the 1970s with the campaign for I Love New York.
There's only one Broadway. It's in New York. Introducing I Love New York Broadway Show Tours. 16 specially priced packages of shows and hotels. For a free booklet, see your travel agent or call toll-free 800-331-1000.
I love New York, especially in the evening.
And you can see how her theatrical background came into play there. So by the mid-'70s, Mary Wells, the highest paid woman in advertising, at $300,000 per year, and doesn't sound like as much today, but do the inflation calculation on that, and I think you'll see that's in today's money, that even today would be a lot of money. So that's the Creative Revolutionaries chapter, looking at that very interesting period of the 1960s. A lot of memorable advertising campaigns there, and I think still a lot to be learned from the advertising that was done during that time. All right, good. Thanks, and we'll see you next time.